Do you think it's become too politicized?
Oh, it's definitely become too politicized. In fact, some of the scientists who are the leaders in the issue have become, for lack of a better word, political tools on the issue. Yes, we need to make some changes in our energy technology. More efficient technology is a good thing. But at the same time, I think that some of the issues have been oversold, and they've been oversold because they allow for more regulation to take place.
In 2018, the United Nations released an urgent report emphasizing the need to cut carbon emissions in half by 2030 in order to avoid an irreversible climate crisis. The average consumer in Sweden causes around 10 tons of carbon emissions each year, of which 60% is linked to consumption. Later in 2018, Doconomy, a Swedish fintech, took on the challenge and launched Do, a mobile banking service for everyday climate action. The Do app is connected to a credit card that enables users to track and measure their carbon footprint from each purchase and to compensate for its impact day by day. This spring, Doconomy took its fight against climate change one step further by adding a premium credit card to its offer. But instead of introducing a premium credit card with the typical benefits that encourages further mass consumption, Doconomy did the opposite by launching Do Black, the world's first credit card with a carbon limit. Simply put, it's the first credit card ever to stop you from overspending. Not based on your available funds, but rather on the levels of CO2 emissions caused by your consumption. Do Black helps you track your climate impact and ensures that you reduce it by 50% in line with the UN 2030 recommendation.
The core purpose of Do Black is not only the ability to measure the impact of your consumption, but also bringing it to a direct halt, making it a radical tool against climate change.
For years, credit cards have put a limit on our credit. Do Black puts a limit on our impact.
I'm Brian Luciani, the head of RISE, created by Barclays.
My name is Mattias Wikström. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Doconomy.
My name is Brennan Spellasy, the CEO of Patch.
My name is Sue Kelsey. I'm the global head of product at MasterCard, leading inclusive and sustainable digital economies.
Welcome to the Climate FinTech Cards and Payments Challenge. Advancing climate action with every transfer, payment, and card swipe.
At MasterCard, with almost 3 billion cardholders across the planet, there's enormous opportunity for impact, where people, economies, and the planet can all thrive.
From offsets as a reward to environmentally friendly e-commerce and blockchain experiences, we're looking forward to powering a wide range of products and features that unleash the green consumer.
This is an unprecedented opportunity to get your climate solutions visibility.
If you want to deliver impact at scale, come join us.
Can't wait to see you in New York.
And best of luck with your applications.
For the benefit of the world and the people on this planet, good luck with your application.
You see, the reason you want to be better is the reason why you aren't. Shall I put it like that? We aren't better because we want to be. Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Because all the do-gooders in the world, whether they're doing good for others or doing it for themselves, are troublemakers. On the basis of kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. See, because sometimes doing good to others and even doing good to oneself is amazingly destructive. Because it's full of conceit. How do you know what's good for other people? How do you know what's good for you? If you say you want to improve, then you ought to know what's good for you. But obviously you don't, because if you did, you would be improved. So we don't know. because I'm afraid very much that our selection of virtues may not work. Don't please breed us down to a few excellent types. Excellent for what? We never know how circumstances are going to change and how our need for different kinds of people changes. At one time, we may need very individualistic and aggressive people. At another time, we may need very cooperative, team-working people. At another time, we may need people who are full of interest in dexterous manipulation of the external world. At another time, we may need people who explore into their own psychology and are introspective. There is no knowing, but the more varieties and the more skills we have, obviously, the better. So you see, here again, the problem comes out in genetics. We do not really know how to interfere with the way the world is. The way the world actually is an enormously complex, interrelated organism.
Laten we beginnen in Nederland, die uitstootrechten verdelen en dat elk huishouden of elke burger een hoeveelheid uitstootrechten krijgt. Zodat we opgeteld niet meer uitstoten dan onze grens. Vervolgens kunnen we, het zit in een carbon wallet, kan je dat noemen.
Kan je het bijkopen.
Ja, en dan kan je, als ik wil vliegen, koop van iemand die niet gaat vliegen, omdat hij daar bijvoorbeeld geen geld voor heeft. Die verkoopt aan mij zijn carbon uitstootrechten en krijgt daardoor een beetje meer geld. Ja. Of diegene woont in een kleiner huurhuis en ik woon in een groot huis. Ik heb dus meer uitstootrechten nodig om mijn huis te verwarmen. En zo kunnen mensen met een smalle portemonnee ook iets verdienen aan vergroening.
This is Jeroen van Manen. I'm a dairy farmer from Zeewolde, a city in the middle of the Netherlands. Someone asked me if I could send a message what's going on in Holland, what's all about these farmer protests and why are Dutch farmers angry. Well, the farmer protests are already here since 2.5 years. The 1st of October 2019 was the first time Dutch farmers had a very big protest. We all went to The Hague. And actually that was more like some protest about the wind which was blowing already probably for 30 years, that somewhere there's a problem in the environment, there's a problem with pollution. Agriculture sector gets pointed at as main cause of all problems. After that, after the biggest protest, nitrogen problems came up, and nitrogen problems aren't new. 30 years ago already, nature people start talking about nitrogen pollution, which would make the rain sour, and all the sour rain would cause lots of damage to the nature parks, to forests. And when you would hear these voices, all the nature would be gone in a few years. Well, 30 years later, nature's still there. Most of it is in excellent condition. Well, 2.5 years, people start talking about nitrogen emission, ammonia from agriculture sector. There's also nitrogen pollution because of the traffic, because of the industry, nitrogen oxides. But we don't talk about it a lot. When the nitrogen problem is called in Holland, it's focusing most of the times on agriculture sector only. Well, when the thing started, and actually what I wanted to do is reducing the nitrogen emission and especially the nitrogen deposition on nature parks. Well, it started, agriculture sector came together, all parties like the dairy industry, pork industry, chicken industry, you could ever call whatever industries, came together, made a big plan. There was a lot of solutions in it, and we tried to solve the problem. Our government, in the meanwhile, went on with making other plans, which resulted in the latest new plan a few weeks ago, and it's terrible. It's idiot, and it's of no use. What they did is they divided Holland in different regions. Some regions have to lower their emissions by 12%, some regions have to lower their emissions by 46, 75 or 95%. In the meanwhile, our juridical system is this on this moment that no innovations in agriculture sector are allowed to use. So there are different techniques for lowering your emission, but when you are asked for a court and a judge will look into your innovations, they will say you can't use it. So the only reason, the only thing to lower your emissions right now is just cutting your herd back. And actually you're probably coming at the main cause of it all. Nitrogen is more like, we call it stick to beat the dog. It's just to camouflage the real cause. Some left-wing parties in Holland and probably all over the world, it's the same movement. They want to get rid of animal industries. They want to have a transition to more plant-based food, transition to vegetarians. We have all the stuff together. In Holland we also have a party like that, and they asked for 50% reduction of our national herd. That's probably on this moment the main cause of it all. We're not talking about nitrogen, no, they just want to reduce the national herd. Well, every farmer all around the world and also every citizen knows that cutting back the herd isn't the cause of any problems. You know, we are producing food. 2/3 of agricultural land on the planet can only be grown by grass. And you need cows like this for making grass into meat or into milk or whatever you want. Whatever problem with emissions, with pollution on the world you are asking about, whether it's not chemical, but farming is probably a part of the problem, but most of it all, it's part of the solution. Well, Dutch farmers now are getting angry every day more. Government is not listening. And what we are fearing for is we have to leave our land, and that's also a deeper agenda behind it. In Holland, they just want to have farmers' land. 62% of the area in Holland is farmed by farmers, and what they want to do is they want to have the land cheap, so they're making it nature first, and when they have the land in their hands, they can build houses on it. Houses we don't need by Dutch citizens, because average Dutch couple is getting 1.8, 1.9 kids. So what's the problem of the demand for houses? That we get 100,000 refugees in this country every year. That's why they have to build houses. Well, that's a shortcut of our problems right now. Farmers are getting angry. They're not listened by the government. Every solution we came on with, they don't take it. And what we see right now, when we have to reduce our national herd, when we have to reduce our herds by ourselves, farms will break down. On this moment, when the plan of the government is coming through, probably 30, 40, 50% of the farmers have to fear for the future. That's why we're on the street, that's why we're protesting, that's why the protesters are going harder. And actually, quite happily, all around the world, people start looking at Holland, what's happening there. Well, what the warning from the Dutch farmers is that every citizen from Holland especially, but also in Europe, probably around the globe, have to look at what do we want to have to eat in a few years' time. Dutch agriculture is world champion on every class, whether we talk about nitrogen, whether we talk about other pollutions. Dutch farming is best in all chapters, so it's no solution to get rid of Dutch farmers. The production which is going away up here needs to come back in another different area from the world. Well, we need transport for that. It gives CO2 emissions, and also the standards of production up there aren't as high as in Dutch agriculture. So that's why we're fighting on the street. We want to stay on our land. When we are part of a problem, we want to solve it. We can do it. We always did it. Nitrogen pollution, nitrogen emissions turned back 68% by agriculture sector in Holland in the last 30 years. So we prove we can do a lot of things, but we will keep on farming. We will fight for our farms. That's why we have the actions. We have the protest in the country. We're asking a lot of attention for our problems. This is in Holland we call it a farmer's handkerchief, and it's made the symbol of the battle of the farmers right now. And actually It feels good that foreign people asking for what's happening in Holland, and we're warning you all over Europe. This problem, which is here in Holland, can be your problem in the next years. So we're asking for support from farmers and also citizens in Europe, all around the world. This problem could be your problem. When citizens want to have food on the plate in the next 10 years, then we have to stand up for our farmers. Dutch farmers are standing up. We are supporting all farmers around the world. Keep on doing what we do, and we have to start fighting for our farms, for our future, for our families, and for food on the table. Thanks very much.
But the climate crisis hoax is even risking famine and starvation. As we speak, farmers in the Netherlands, of all places, are courageously opposing the climate tyranny of the Dutch government. Can you believe this? Which wants to dramatically cut Dutch farm production despite growing food shortage. They're saying you can't farm your land. We're not going to give you fertilizer. You have to get rid of the cattle. You know why, right? You know why? I won't tell you because they'll say, I said something, isn't that terrible? They want to get rid of the cattle because what it does to the globe. Half of your cattle they want out. You'll be next. You'll be next.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about cycles. In climate change, from skeptics and from scientists, you get all kinds of talk about cycles. And they're all trying to explain cycles of different things. And I want to show you something interesting about cycles. This green line is this oxygen isotope data measured with little critters in seafloor sediments. And it's from 57 of the best sites out there. So we're getting an average temperature measured at a lot of sites around the world throughout the last 150,000 years. And you can see at the Eemian interglacial here, we were warmer, and then we cooled down, and we seemed to go up and down and up and down, and we reached the bottom of the ice age here about 15 to 20,000 years ago. This looks like pretty good data, and it's based on a lot of data. It's averaged together very nicely. Now, if we add to that the insolation due to Milankovitch cycles, this is where there's a change in the amount of sun reaching the Earth because of a change in orbit of the distance from the sun and the position of the sun and so on. We can see there's sort of some similarity here. I mean, it's really bad back here, but here, it's pretty similar. And if we did some fancy statistics, we could come up with a correlation coefficient. And, you know, we might or might not be impressed. Now I have the ice core data. This is the real data at the top of the graph in purple. This is ice cores from Greenland. And notice that there's not much correlation at all with these other two cyclical things. It's happening much more quickly. The average of the data suggests that the end of the ice age was about 15 to 20,000 years ago. That's the lowest point in the ice age back there, about 70,000 years ago. And that sometime in one of those low points was when people went to Australia. That's when sea level would have been the lowest. And while the people in Australia we're seeing now are 40,000 years old or whatever, 45,000 years, it's during these lows in the ice age that would have been their best chance to get there. So what I really want to emphasize is that the real data, the data where you've got time resolution, one of the nice things about the oxygen isotope data is you're measuring a sample. And so you have, as well as you can date that sample, you've got pretty good time resolution and that kind of measuring of things. But what we see here, comparing what we see in the boreholes in Greenland, the purple data, that there's a huge change going on, up and down, up and down, up and down. So global warming throughout geologic time has been happening suddenly and irregularly. So my argument is volcanoes rule climate. The balance between sudden explosive volcanic eruptions and long periods of effusive volcanic eruptions driven by tectonic plate motions provides the only clear explanation for why climate changes suddenly and irregularly throughout Earth history, from small to gargantuan amounts, gargantuan being the Siberian basalts, and the small amounts being those little wiggles we're looking at. But those changes happened, and it's hard to think of any other mechanism that can explain this sudden warming and this slow cooling. Now again, I want to go back in the geologic record over the last 600 million years. And here I've plotted in green the oxygen isotope proxy for temperature again. And you can see it's fairly jagged. Again, what's great about this oxygen isotope is you're measuring on a critter. And so you can get data points as finely as you can space critters. And we can see that there are times that were warm, that are up, and times that were colder. And they were basically looking at geologic history. There were 4 epochs of glaciation. And these have been discussed looking at the rocks and the sediments that are left behind by Crowell and Frakes and many others, that there are 4 basic epochs that we can recognize. And what you notice is that we can see that here in the oxygen isotope data. Now the blue curve is sea level, and it was initially called the Vail curve or the Exxon curve. And this is based on looking at sediments around the world and putting together the offshore story. And you can see that, sure, there was times when the sea level was highest, when there was the most warming, and sea level tends to be lowest when there's glaciation. It takes time to get there, it takes time to heat and cool the ocean. In this case, the data is kind of smoothed out. I'm sure it was much more jagged, but the resolution we have is it's again smoothed out, and we go back to what I was saying about cycles. You have to be a little careful, realizing now that things happen so quickly. But anyway, there's a pretty good correlation there. Now, if we add carbon dioxide, those first 2 curves are based on data, reams and reams of data. The carbon dioxide curve here is based on modeling by Robert Berner from Yale in something he calls the geocarb-sulf model. And what he's looking at is how rocks on land weather and how the sediments get formed and what you expect the CO2 content in the atmosphere to be. It's very thoughtful work. He's got numerous papers on it. It is modeling. We have to be a little bit careful. But what we see is that back at this period of time, before around 500 million years, 540 million years ago, CO2 was 18 times the level of CO2 at the beginning of the industrial age. 18 times. This was a time of major warming, but there was some major cooling in here too. Oh, I didn't point out that the one calibration he has for this data is if you look at the density of stomata, of pores on leaves, fossil leaves, is something you can see. You can get an estimate by that density of stomata as to the CO2 concentration at the time that leaf was seen. So there are several data points on Berner's curve that help calibrate what CO2 was. But again, this is primarily modeling. One has to be careful, but it certainly suggests that there's not much relationship between CO2 and geologic time with the changes going on in climate. Now, I can give a 2-hour lecture with all the different examples in geologic time. In my book, I go through that in some detail, but even then, there's just lots of data throughout geologic time that you really have to start waving your arms a lot to explain with CO2. So the question is, are we Earth scientists absolutely sure that the hand of carbon dioxide fits the glove of reality? Now, I'm not talking about O.J. Simpson here. This is the question of whether CO2 fits the glove of reality. It's never actually been shown experimentally that increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases actually cause the air to warm. It's amazing. We've gotten to the point we are today of getting ready to spend $10 trillion to reduce carbon dioxide when it's never been shown experimentally that actually causes air to warm. There was an experiment done in 1900 by Knut Angstrom, a fairly famous spectral physicist, and he did an experiment in the Canary Islands. He did an experiment in the laboratory, and he said, I don't see much change when you increase CO2. And his work has never been duplicated. Nobody's ever done that experiment.
So it's about managing the collapse in these timelines. And the presentation I'm putting together today, seemingly unrelated events are all fully related together here. And I wanted to put a specific timeline with it. This managed collapse that we're seeing, now the climate that you're looking at here, the data, you can start to see rise and fall of civilization through time. And you wonder why they've reached these apex and then they collapse. Well, these high points are when there's warm weather on our planet, high solar activity, and the ability to grow food in an abundance that allows there to be leisure, extra free time. And the collapse is when it comes into a cool period known as dark ages or a grand solar minimum. Not a full-blown glaciation, but something that is on the cooler phase. So you ask yourself, why did these civilizations rise and fall? I mean, look at these cradles of civilization. Harappa here, this is bone dry now. So something had switched and it was verdant milk and honey, just like you also see the Fertile Crescent. You know, some of these eras of time where the birth of our current civilization arose from, some of the driest places in the world that could no way in shape or form hold and create a civilization that rose to greatness. Now, the way we look at money today is different. Now, when you go through history, food has been scarcer and it's been pegged to the grains of wheat for the amount of metals. It's the opposite today. So the grains of wheat would have measured out to a shekel. And what you're looking at on the left there, this gold coin is from the kingdom of Aksum. And you notice there's a wheat with the king. And then also on the coin on the right there, it's all about food, entertainment, and possible medicine. But you have to think about how valuable food was, that it was pegged to the metal versus what we're doing today. Now, this whole thing, giving timelines moving forward, and what do you see out in the landscape today? I see a bunch of distraction. I see a lot of built-in excuses why things are happening. So you don't ask too many questions because there's a ready-made excuse. So global warming. There's a lot of ancient knowledge that's been hidden from the general masses. If you knew these cycles, the ebbs and flows of what created society and reset society, if you knew them, like the ancient, you know, they talk always about the Mayans, the priests would look up and know when the eclipses were coming and people would be like, oh, pay homage, they know the eclipse. Same thing here. If you knew this 400-year cycle was rolling around once again and it was going to limit food production to the point where all disposable income is going to go into food, you would have a ready-made excuse. It's called global warming. But in actuality, I'd like you to look at the picture of the sun here, and can you even find the Earth on the bottom left, how small it is, a mere million miles, 93 million miles from here. So for people to come out and say that CO2 and you driving your car has much more effect than this thing that's millions of times larger than us sitting off to the left over there, where you can barely even identify the Earth connected electromagnetically, is, well, you're not looking at the history for those who are making the narratives. So it's all about the sunspots and the activity in the sun, the strength of the sun's output. The higher the output, the higher their agricultural production. The higher civilization, there's time for creativity, art, mathematics, engineering, and all these things that we've seen through history. When we come into low solar activity, people struggle. And the sunspots are right there. And if you look at that second graph in the middle, and I create a lot of these own graphs myself here to do for presentations, the 11-year solar cycle that we always read about in the news, the blue is the higher solar activity and the red is the lower solar activity. And you can see quite a stark difference in it. 1600s was a full reset of how the workings of government, finance, and population moved, traded, and were overseen around the planet. Huge. After the Maunder minimum, it was completely reconstructed just like it is being now. So if you look at where the forecast is going, we're heading right back into another grand solar minimum, which means the reset button is pressed, so new things need to happen to move society. Now, if you look in the very forward chart there, the brown is the apex and the blue is the dark ages. Blue means cold and wet. Moldy crops, fungusy crops, people are sick, difficult to grow things, cloudy conditions, and really difficult and a struggle at that time without mechanized machinery to bring crop yields in. So if you look out at the solar cycles here, the first one is the 11-year solar cycle, and then you can couple them together with the 4 where it's the space age record. Then you go a little further back into the early 1900s, late 1800s. They were looking in the telescopes, taking pictures, or not pictures, but drawing down what they saw onto the paper. And if you go to the far back chart there, we're really looking at just a very small snippet of time. And you can see of even going back a couple hundred years on that chart in the back there is nothing. I mean, nothing in time. So when you hear all these global warming and climate change going, oh, it's the warmest ever, it's the warmest. Well, they're looking at that tiniest of little sliver. What about the other 8,000 years behind that? Is there anything that we could see? Well, what I see is the different perspective to look at history, why things rose to greatness and why they collapsed. We think we have the best tech right now, the highest tech. Well, so did they. Every era through history had the best tech of their time. Why were none of them able to withstand these changes up to now? And for us to be so naive to think that would be different. See, and the elite know this because they have, think about how many navies had gone around for kings and queens and pillaged the planet for 500 years, and all the information they gleaned and brought back with them about the cycles. Now, I've pretty much in-depth studied back to, say, 400 BC with the Homeric minimum. And what I come to find out is there's a fingerprint in this whole reset, if you will, for the better term of it, fingerprint of a grand solar minimum. Government overthrow or government restructuring because people are hungry and they demand change at the edge of a pitchfork. Population migration, people would pick up their ox carts and then move. We have faster transportation means now, but imagine that. We're not able to move around the planet. We're being locked in place because everybody migrated through these events. And the economic disarray where trade collapsed, farming collapsed, food collapsed, prices up. And imagine that we're seeing cryptocurrency coming in right now. Right at the same time, we're getting these epically high food prices. And by the end of the year, you're going to see something you never thought possible. So you wonder going back a few steps in history, why the Chinese were so focused on the heavens. It's called the mandate from heaven. The emperor had the fortitude to rule the nation, the kingdom, if he could provide food for the people. And when the food from the people stopped, the mandate from heaven was removed. Now, talking about electromagnetic fields and a second magnetic field forming in the outer solar system that's going to start to shake and rift and crack our crust, starting now through 2024, that's going to have an effect on all transportation and supply systems. This is so deeply ingrained in Chinese mythology that the legends of Nuwan, Fuxi, and then over here on the right, what we're looking at are these field-aligned currents called Steve, these plasma filaments that have just started to appear in our skies since 2018. Now, this is a sign in the skies, a sign in the heavens. The food is the number one thing that allows a society. No food production, there's no economy. You have no economy. And you look around the world at the countries that import the most food, they have a very low GDP normally. If it's not, it's just tech. The food producers are the ones that have the highest amount of GDP running because there's other things involved. You produce the food, you produce the wealth, period. No food. You could be starving to death on the floor and I'll put a 5-pound gold bar next to you. It's meaningless unless you have food to run the society. Now, if you take a look at what the Western society is about, it's all about the zodiacal signs. And again, what I find so interesting is right in this, it's about the intensity of the sun right on Leo. So it's always ingrained across our cultures here. And you know what? We just switched into a new star sign. We just moved into Aquarius officially back in December of 2020. Now, this whole great reset has started now. And we're talking about electromagnetic changes that have been mapped out through all cultures, about the energetic inflow, changes an enormous amount of workings on our planet, including how people are overseen, how they're ruled, how the economy works, and a whole gamut of things. So mapping it out, because it's so important for almost every culture prehistory up to, we've been taught not to learn it in the last few decades. But look at this, Leo right here is 180 degrees back from where we just moved into Aquarius. So if we're talking about longer cycles, this move into Aquarius is an entirely new energy frequency. And what really started me taking a look at all these changes was when I was living and working in China. I was a super fan of history. I'd always travel when I had a chance in China to take a look at the ruins. Now, what you're looking at here is the Chinese dynasties overlaid on the Greenland Ice Core survey project's mean temperature over the last 1,000 years. Now, I overlaid the classical dates of the collapse of the rulers and the emperors there right on top. And you notice that each of the collapses that is agreed in history always falls in a cool period, or there was some kind of famine, or like you see, Genghis Khan took off and was going around looking for better grounds and whatnot. Again, we're talking about longer periods of time. And if you start to see these longer periods, you'll start to understand the narrative's been built around 30 years of data. Why? We should be looking at longer cycles to understand what happened in the past is what's going to happen again and is beginning to happen again right now. So in those longer periods of time, or we can even break it down into a 200-year cycle. We got the De Vries cycles, we got the Gleisberg cycles there, the Schwab cycles. And these overlay and couple into the 400-year grand solar minimum, which in turn couples 5 of those into a super grand solar minimum. And then you get the variance of the Bray cycle, like on that 3,600-year iteration. And there's other cooling events that are pretty much on those same 8,200 years. And then we get the entry and the exits of the ice ages. And everywhere you look in history, the food represented the value of the silver, not the other way around. That's why it is so front and center in every silver coin of the time, how valuable food was. It was the center of society. Now, see, when I was trying to do the initial research understanding why these societies collapsed because of lack of food production, I was kind of in a narrow focus. I was thinking cold, cold, wet, cold, they can't grow food. But I started to do a lot more research, come across these kind of charts here where you look at the different continents and they all did not cool uniformly. Although through the historical record, every single continent was affected, hands down. Kingdoms, fiefdoms, emperors, kings, queens, didn't matter, all affected, all at the same time. All in the same periods on 400-year cycles. So you can see it's not a uniform cooling chart. So I was thinking, has to be something else. So I started to look at food pricing first to see where we might go in the future. You know, you can't speculate out like it's different this time, it'll be different. I'm just using historical precedent here. Average food price increase is going to be a 4x on the average food price increase. This is 1755 to 1800 over in Switzerland, and wheat and rye pricing. So the dots are the wheat, and they go pretty much in sync. So whatever grain it might be in our modern era, they're probably all going to march lockstep, like the run up that we've had just in these last month or so. There's an anomaly here in 1690 up to 1700 though, where it spiked 7x, and then it spiked 6x. That was coming out of this grand solar minimum called the Monner minimum in 1640. It ended around 1660, and it seemed to be some trailing effect until they got food production back up. They had a couple bad years right there, and that's what drove up the prices. Maybe it scared everybody again. They thought they were going back into another grand solar minimum, and they took advantage of it. So historically, there's a lot of opportunity right now, huge amounts of opportunity. Don't even look at this as a negative. Look at it as the biggest possible opportunity in human history. There's going to be a huge amount of population migration. People are going to want to move to where it's warmer, prices are better, easier to grow food, hire people to grow food for you, be able to have gardens taken care of for you. And these are the maps that were reconstructed on where it got cold first and where crops were lost over this time. So the darkest of the blue is where we're starting to see crop losses already across the planet. So it's matching up pretty much, I'm not going to say 100%, but very close to where a lot of losses are happening now. The forecast going out, high solar activity on the left, and then we're heading into something on the right here, almost no sunspots for a few years, 5-6 years, no sunspots, possibly longer, still to be worked out. A lot of the experts, quote unquote, were saying solar cycle 25. No, it'll have no effect on food production or our society. You're crazy. It's going to happen in solar cycle 26. And I'm thinking, all right, I don't care if it happens in the next 9 years. Okay, thanks for staving off 9 years. We're going to have to deal with it after that for the next 11. So we should be talking about it right now. But this in earnest is kind of the forecast here. We are heading into this low solar activity period, and governments are riding on top of this natural cycle with the advanced knowledge of where the changes will occur, when they're going to occur, the intensity of it, and what infrastructure is going to be broken on which continents. And this is where the reset's occurring. If you want to do more research, the Maunder minimum here, 1650 to 1700, and you saw when it was exiting out, they had problems because the magnetic field was turning back on, so the jet streams were trying to lock back in place. So it took a few years for the Earth to restabilize after the sun actually kicked back on magnetically. So you can see coming into it, we get crop losses, and going out of it, we get crop losses. Another piece of history that you might want to take a look at if you're considering different locations to get yourself to during these changes, or if you're looking how to get into, I guess, the agricultural sphere or places for your families to be safe, whatever it would be. These are where the jet streams and intertropical convergent zone moved to during these times. The last one here. Moisture moves, droughts come, wetter or drier. It's already been mapped out through these last cycles. So you already know where the moisture is going to move to. You already know where the droughts are going to move to. Now that's on the surface of the planet. Magnetic field is something different. And you can see how Indonesia and Australia fared during this time too, and how the precipitation moved north and south, and what you can expect. And this goes back to the year 1000 as well. So thinking about some of these more equatorial warmer countries, or some of these countries 15 degrees north latitude or south latitude, and how the precipitation is going to shift. Because you might be in a dry zone like in Western Africa, the Sahel, that's becoming wetter, and that's going to be a new Goldilocks zone. Now with this, if you had the advanced knowledge and you knew the jet streams were going to go out of flow and growing seasons would get shorter and there would be incredible rains, how would you keep the masses placated and sort of feeling comfortable during these changes while you're preparing in the background, putting all of the assets in place to take care of things as it unfurled? So you see what you call this Arctic vortex, or the equatorial vortex, is nothing more than these regular what are locked in jet streams just going out of flow. There's no more tightness on it or electromagnetic effect to lock it in place. The more the sun steps down, the looser these magnetic fields are, and the weaker and more loose our jet streams are going to go out of their flow, as well as the cloud cells. So these cloud cells are moving into different locations now. And this is why you're getting that year worth of rain in a single event, because these are collapsing in on each other. And there's different layers of cloud being formed about 16,000 to 18,500 feet as these overlay and roll in on each other, and they collide up in the atmosphere, and you get bending jet streams moving in, so there's a full collision in the atmosphere happening. So knowing this, I went in many directions trying to figure out where the food crop losses were over the last several of these events to try to forecast for the future, and also how quickly it happened. So, you take a look at the witch trials here. So the worse the weather was, the higher the crop losses, the more famine there was, the more witch trials there were. And you might laugh and go, that's nonsense. Well, from 1550, witch trials were based on crop losses. And what is it today? Oh, you bad human, you got to blame them again. You're driving an SUV. We see the same things repeated in history. There's always has to be a scapegoat somewhere. It was the witches there, but it's good data because you can see where the crop losses happened, and you can see the exact same spots with all the incredible record snows, late harvest, wipe out of the grain, and the wine vines in these exact same areas. So it's a pretty good match here too, using where the witch trials were, because they were so scared. All right, so that's leading up to the whole premise of the presentation here is what's going to happen from now to 2024 in October. We all need to know so we can share ideas and come up with solutions. So what you're looking at is on the left, 79 AD. The four gas giants, the Jovians, are out there in the outer solar system, and we got 2024. Notice the planetary geometry is only 1 degree arc off of difference. 1 degree out of the full 360 degrees, 1 degree of arc, some almost 2,000 years later. So you can expect the electromagnetic effects that this would have in the same formation would have the same electromagnetic effects on our planet as the sun steps down, and that magnetic field equalizes across the outer gas giants and our sun. So to make it a little bit easier to understand, I'm going to run through a few graphics here. So equalizing charge. If the sun's really highly charged, our Earth's going to be highly charged. If it steps down, our Earth steps down. They equalize the charge. They go to equilibrium. And that's the whole thing. And then what happens with our crust if it goes to equilibrium? Well, you're going to start to get earth cracks, and you're going to start to get sinkholes, and you're going to start to get a lot of other things as this electromagnetic coupling starts to weaken, and another magnetic field jumps in to take its place. So things are going to bend, rift, and well, you're going to start to see a few things with water. Excuse me, speaking of water. Aquifers are going to be moving in different places. So some areas might go dry really quickly and you'll be like, wait, what happened to that lake, that river, that aquifer? Well, the crust had an anomaly in the top 2 miles and the water was redirected elsewhere. Water's going to come out of the earth some other place and it'll become boggy suddenly. So if you see vast areas becoming dry instantly, i.e. California, perhaps that's the excuse why they're trying to explain away a surface drought when it's really all the aquifers they're depending on have, with a few anomalies so far that have happened, started to move water in different places. They don't have the pumping that they used to. Still water there, but it's just not to the level and depth. So this is the square formation I'm talking about. The Earth is going to be directly between that second magnetic field and the sun coming in 2024 of October. So I'll put a couple lines on it so you can see it a little more clearly. That's magnetic field B. And magnetic field A is going to be our sun. So these 4 magnetic gas giants are going to couple in together. So you can already see how the magnetic fields are looping anyway, but when they get in that square, they're going to start looping in on themselves to create a much larger field. Weak magnetic field combined. Although a second magnetic field in our solar system, which generally does not happen except once every 2,000 years. So you can see the 2 magnetic fields here. Now the Earth's going to be sandwiched between those two as we move forward. Now, using a torus looping magnetic waves, very simplistic drawing, we're going to be an Earth sandwich between 2 magnetic fields looping in, and it's going to try to equalize through the Earth, actually, because we're only 3 planets away from the sun, and we're only going to be 2 planets away from the second magnetic field, Mars and us. So let's put it into a different perspective. I'm coming a little bit higher tech, give you a good visual here. 2 magnetic fields. The Earth's going to be in the center of it. So everything you understand about magnetism and electromagnetism, electricity, the flow of energies, the flow of water, spin dynamics, torsion physics is all going to be affected during this time, including electrical generation, generators, and different things. Block domain wall is where we're going to be moving into. So think of the Earth as that center line. And you'll start to see, whether it's a north or south, you'll see this same iconography through all ancient mystic traditions of the owl represented. There's a lot, they understood these magnetic fields and what's about to happen to the planet. So let's say you're a government and you understand what it is too. The Earth's going to be pulled into a slight ellipsoid. There are going to be breakthroughs of mud, water, sand volcanoes, mud volcanoes, sinkholes, cracks, and these types of crustal anomalies probably in the top 2 miles of the Earth. As it's pulled slightly, I'm talking ever so slightly. But you got to think about 2 miles of the crust, even if it's pulled just even a few feet, your railroads are unusable. Your roads are unusable. Bridges are collapsing and pulling off the banks at that point. Even if it's just 2 feet of difference on the Earth's crust. So to put it in perspective, what about all these pipelines? And it just so, doing this research here, and I saw that Colonial Pipeline thing, oh no, they're doing a test run to see what's going to happen and how people are going to react emotionally when they can't get their fuels. Now think about, even if 1% of these crack, how would that affect business on this, I'm going to say the entire planet, or even just on the continent here? What if 5% of them break in multiple places? But then the rails will break and the bridges will break, so you can't get the repair and maintenance crews in there to repair it for such a long time. What about the railroads? It's going to follow the same profile. Like anything that's infrastructure on the surface of the planet is going to get cracked, broken, rifted, and shifted. Now it makes sense why they've never repaired our electrical grid anywhere in the last how many years? Why the roads in America are falling apart? Why our bridges need repaired so badly, and they're squandering money on ridiculous programs that are never going to help anything except push you and enslave you into the arms of the corptocracy or the nation state. Looking at this, it makes sense why nothing's been repaired, because the advanced knowledge, they knew, these elitists knew that it would all be not going to be all unusable, but there's going to be a percentage of it that's going to break, and they're going to come to a new system. And here's another thing electromagnetically. This old system of rulership on the planet and farming of the human, if this is farm Earth here, this financial structure will not work any longer at all. So cryptocurrency is coming in to take the place of this. But you ask yourself, well, why won't it work? It worked once before. You have to think about the electromagnetic frequency on the sun, on the earth, in the Jovians and the gas giants out there, and your resonant frequency inside the way you're perceiving reality around you. Because I have heard so many people say things I thought they would never, ever say before. And you hear them, you're like, what? You said that? It's the resonant frequency that we're stepping up into, because Aquarius is a faster energy. That darkness of central banking and armies and death for 400, 500 years of kings and queens and nonstop war comes to an end to a point, because the way we're perceiving reality is unacceptable anymore. And the step up in energies means the old, archaic, dark, heavy energy system can't exist. Hence the reset. Do you think they love you right now and they just want to change everything because they love everybody? No, it's because they want to stay in power and they understand where this frequency is going to take us. They understand the perception change is going to be what? They're trying to pre-plan for when we get there, they're already there. The New World Order is not about now, it's about after this event or the new world. That's where we're going with this. So the perception change inside the human being or the human mind is going to rock things to the core anyway. Everything will be no longer, you could already see how it's almost not acceptable anywhere. And the old rulership and, so let's say, legacy finance and legacy central banking, legacy armies and all this, people are just like, enough of that. Because the awakening is happening and it's an electromagnetic frequency change. The heaviness can't exist in that frequency, so it's being reset. So the power elite try to stay in the new frequency, and it's going to be all set. All the excuses when it pops up and this event's over, the new frequency will be held and a new system will be held inside that frequency for them, hopefully not to be able to take power if more people know about what's happening, riding on a natural cycle. Cryptocurrency is awesome. I'm a huge believer. Love it. It's a way for freedom, but it's going to be tried to use to enslave, especially with central bank digital currencies. Monero, you get something more anonymous, BTC, I know, for the store of value. But when we look at this, the assets have been put in place. Like, think about the billions and billions of dollars spent on psychological research for the last 100 years to know how stimulus A on a human being will result in what action. Billions, hundreds of billions of dollars been spent on this research. They already know what your actions are going to be response. So when stock prices crash, food prices skyrocket, bread shelves are empty, have you noticed we're in a militarized police state already? They pre-position the assets to take care of the citizens who are going to demand change when the food gets too expensive. It's been an ongoing thing for what, 20 years? 9/11, suddenly a military police state slowly drip fed in. They knew about this cycle 30 years ago. They could have warned the people. They could have told everybody. We could have gotten ready right now together, but they're still trickling along. And I was always wondering what the catalyst would be of when the elite with this hidden knowledge would start to take action on what events would trigger them to go for it. 2019, the COVID dripped in at the end of the year. But also, in addition, let's walk through a couple of things that triggered the elite to go, it's here. We need to do whatever we do to control the masses, stop the population migration, get the crypto to mass adoption, and then change the government structure for more inclusiveness. So the solar wind, it keeps our magnetosphere locked tight. Well, it didn't. There was no solar wind, and our magnetosphere puffed up like a big cotton candy thing that you would buy at the state fair or whatever. No solar wind was the indication that the sun has changed its phase. So solar wind, no solar wind, huge effects on the jet stream. Also, the narrative we were fed for the last, 25 years is Greenland ice is melting, Greenland ice is melting. This is from the Danish Meteorological Institute. The ice started to, that was the blue line, is the ice gain for the year that surpassed the 30-year averages, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then they stopped publishing the data because it was so far over and it was hard to hold narrative. So there was a lot of, hey, you got to publish the data, publish the data. So they started to publish the data again. And lo and behold, this year, just last month, biggest gain ever on Greenland for ice in a single month ever, and it's going into the melt season. And we were talking about historically, as far back as you can go, it's the largest amount of ice gain, and you can see the blues above the averages there. So there was a lot of things starting to happen here. And the fastest zonal jet stream winds as well. Now, that kicked off in 2019 in the latter half. So here now we got these atmospheric anomalies that are starting to trigger. Atmosphere is starting to go, sun's starting to trigger it. Now we got rare tornadoes at the highest altitude ever recorded, which means that our atmosphere and the earth here starts to compress a little bit to allow that spin formation at a higher pressure to make the tornado. Okay, so you're starting to see a lot of atmospheric anomalies, and this is what was alerting the elite to start to get ready to go with their COVID thing. Highest and coldest cloud tops ever recorded on the planet at the last of 2019. This was definitely the thing that sent them over the edge, in my opinion, that you're starting to get these all evers, all in the same year of 2019. And here's where it gets into the electromagnetic effects to prove that the earth has started to step down and change based on the sun. And see, the elite need to control that. They're going to control the chaos on the way down in a purposeful manner, of course, to keep power. So the last thing is looking to the heavens for the signs. So Pluto's atmosphere collapsed May of 2020. Now you think about that, and we're in the furthest planet. And then 6 months later, Neptune atmosphere reverses. And then you're starting to think, all right, these gas giants are going to start to line up. What other kind of anomalies would we look for if it's a 6-month increment stepping in from the outer planets to the Earth? Uranus starts flaring off these X-rays that are visible from regular cameras. They say it was 2017 photos compiled through this year's photos, but I'm like, wait a second, why'd you release it now in 2021 when you had these images? That doesn't make sense. Anyway, you could see the visible flaring of X-rays coming off onto the rings of Uranus 6 months after that. Jupiter, if you're looking at it from the Earth and it looks kind of bluish tinge, it is. It's not an optical illusion. There's 10x more increase in auroral activity on Jupiter at the moment, which is another sign of increasing electromagnetic activity. And that magnetic field is starting to loop even wider out there. And then you got to go for it. What's the next one that everybody in the elite is looking at? The cult of Saturn. And what's happening with Saturn? Oh, it's starting to have an enormous amount of aurora as well, which means this magnetic field is also looping out much further, connect with Jupiter. So what is going to be the thing that sets off the elite that follow this planet as their god or their demigod, their whatever they worship in this dark arts is on this, and that planet is theirs. When this thing goes off, this is going to be the next one, 6 months. So it'll probably be November of this year in 2021. There'll be a visible sign in the sky. And I mean a visible sign in the sky. And that will be the trigger that the elite are going to start moving when Saturn does its thing, whatever that is, unknown. We had a compressed atmosphere, a reversing atmosphere, X-rays shooting off, incredible auroras. So I'm just wondering what will happen here. Will we see loops off onto the rings, or will the rings have double loops? I'm not sure. Double arcs of plasma coming off? I don't know. But it's going to be go when you see Saturn do something flare-wise or very different that'll make international news. And Kissinger had it right. Dark energy, this person right here. Control the oil, you control the nation. We're way beyond nations now. It's global governance, not a global government at the top. Like, hey, you're not part of my country. I'm not going to listen to you. It's global governance where, the top will say, hey, leaders of this country do this in your country. So it doesn't appear as if it's a government. So it's a governance system. Control the food, control the people. That's where we're at. We're way beyond governments now. The people are going to wake up and overthrow these governments like they have through all the past grand solar minimums. That's just part of it. We're down to the people level now, and they're terrified that we're going to wake up and start. The food gets expensive, your family doesn't eat, you take drastic action. These food lines are going to increase as the economic destruction comes through in this next phase, people are going to not have money these food lines are going to be 10, 20 miles long waiting for food. And at that point, pitchforks come out and they want change. So let me walk you through a couple timelines here of what to expect in the intensification of when our infrastructure is going to start shattering on the planet here. This is for all continents, not just the United States. When we get up here in August, Jupiter is going to start to swing past the Earth. And once it does, we're in the electromagnetic field until 2024. At that point, that juncture point where we get into it, the new magnetic field, just going to be an enormous amount of things unexpected happening that will make international news in terms of, the Colonial Pipeline is like one tiny thing. That high-rise building that fell into the sinkhole is definitely part of this. Because you got to look at Croatia. They had a 6.9 earthquake over there, and they're suddenly getting thousands and thousands of sinkholes that are swallowing roads, farmland, farmhouses, bridges. So it seems that what's happening is starting to manifest a little bit more. So look for August and a lot of earth cracks and earth events. And I'm going to make a bold call here: sand volcanoes and mud volcanoes. As we come up through 2022, you can see the Earth behind the sun there, but the four gas giants are really starting to line up into their configuration. So we're going to get pulled a little closer to the sun. The summer is going to be incredibly baking, and the winter is going to be ferociously cold, but the growth season is going to shrink. And when we get up here into 2023, you can really see how the Earth's getting right into that tight alignment there. And from now on, each summer and each winter is going to get more intense, but the growing season is going to shrink. And this is the problem that they've encountered. That's why there's always sort of a slight lag run up into the social chaos. It takes about 3 years from, actually it started probably in 2019. So we were right at the cusp of the changes. So you're looking at 2024. That second magnetic field is going to be tugging on our planet, and so is the sun, but tugging all the same direction toward the sun, approximately 700,000 miles closer during the summer of this year, 700,000 miles further, a little over 1% further away during the winter. But in earnest, when we get locked in that second magnetic field right there at that, and I don't know if it's going to be a week-long event, a couple of weeks, a few seconds, but when we hit it, it's going to be a resonant change that will be the catalyst of that 400-year change, and everything at that point will be different. And you can understand why all these seemingly discombobulated or disconnected events are connected. The elite are preparing for this. They have the advanced knowledge, and they're riding on top of natural cycles to disguise it from the citizens. So they're not preparing. So you're just quietly, kumbaya-ing in your hammock going in through this. That's what they want. They don't want you answering questions. They don't want you asking questions. And how quickly everybody gave up their liberties for this COVID thing. Oh, sure, I'll stay locked in my house. I won't even ask a question. No, it doesn't matter. See how quickly they were able to move into that direction. So all these tests they knew what people would do with a certain kind of fear stimulus. So what's coming next? I'm not sure. But it's spring. Nope. This is exactly what to expect. We're going to get incredibly shortened growth seasons, and we've already seen it happening again this year. And then the droughts are coming in. The aquifers are going to be not as plentiful in certain places, but it'll be flooding through others. There's going to be a lot of aquifer problems moving forward. And this, just to give you an indication of how I've been doing my research, these maps that I circled in red, I did this in 2017. And I was marking the areas where the crop losses should occur first, continentally, based on past cycles, and then also the record snows and the record cold in these same areas year after year. I started this research 2014. So 2014, 15, 16, 17, and 18. And when it was record after record after record after record each year, and these certain locations, I'd be like, all right, that's the trigger. That's going to be a crop loss zone first. They're going to have tremendous difficulty growing. And just as a normal protocol, anything 45 degrees north of the equator or south of the equator, further toward the poles, it's going to have a difficult time to grow. That encompasses a lot of Canada, a lot of China, Europe, United States. So again, these areas here are pegged in 2017 for crop loss areas in Australia. And not only the mouse plague, but these areas are already reducing in production anyway. China's the one that's going to be the game changer, shall we say. Because if you look up at Heilongjiang, up there at 45 north and above, they're losing that grow zone right now. And the central area around Nanjing in Henan province, that area is also being hit again and again and again and again with the floods. That's where they had the massive floods last year, and they're having massive floods again this year. This is all based on Chinese history, where they had the biggest crop losses. It's not a crystal ball, it's a history book. And a few hours of your time to go visit museums and go pick up books and look in history and see what happened prior. But now China's out on the market trying to buy everything as much as they can. So knowing that areas 45 degrees north latitude and above, you're not going to be able to grow so steadily anymore. I'm almost going to say not zero, but it's going to be very minimal comparatively. So the global yields that we're going to get to carry over, not going to happen. So we're going to have to start thinking about shifting grow zones and new different crops. Like I'm a fan of hemp. I think hemp could be used for an enormous amount of things. You know, too bad it was the reefer madness in the 1930s. Oh, it was a competition with diesel oil and, you know, fabrics and cotton and medicines. Oh, we can't have that. But each 1 degree shift is about 100 miles south, approximately. So some places on the average over modern minimum was at 1.5 or 1.7 up to about 2.5. So at the bare minimum, we're looking about 200 miles south of any crop that we're growing now. Some areas were higher. It was like 6 degrees Celsius they dropped. So you're talking about 600 miles moving grow zones. Where do you put that at? Where do you find it? So I started to make my own maps of possibilities where things could overlap, where you might get new grow zones, things that could expand, and then things are going offline. So the red countries are the ones that are losing production currently, and they're not coming back because they're 45 degrees north and above. And these are the target areas that have already, South Africa for sure, Australia, and the United States, Canada. Blue is about a 5 to maybe 10-year laggard on the reductions in crops. But Brazil, with that mega drought this year, you know, usually they can add in a little bit of extra stock, you know, the carryover, and they, you know, get an extra bit of yield out on the world market there. But Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil all just in a huge, massive drought. I think Brazil lost almost 30% of its crop this year. The ones that are more peach colored, you could expand production there. But you can see these are all politically, well, not the most stable countries right now. And the green is where the biggest possibility to increase crop production will be. And you might say, what are you looking at there? You're talking about the Sahel. And yeah, I am. I'm talking about the Sahel and North Africa as the new grow zone on the planet, as these other areas go offline. And if you look at where the water came, when it came, how rapidly it appeared in the Sahel with the shift of the West African monsoon, you'll understand that whoever controls these 13.8 million square kilometers controls the 21st century. This is going to be the new grow zone. It's all about the shifting of the West African monsoon on a 2,000-year cycle. Now, as this shifts, it's going to be pulling a lot more moisture in. Now, I understand it's not going to be a huge, gigantic amount of rainfall, but you wonder why in Ethiopia did they build the largest hydroelectric dam in Africa and one of the driest places in Africa, unless they knew it was going to rain? And that's exactly what they did. What's that new Renaissance Dam project there? So you're going to need to couple these together. You're going to need above ground rainfall that's increasing with the changes in the West African monsoon rainfall pattern and some areas coming off of East Africa. You're going to need what Libya did. They tapped those underground water resources before the U.S. blew them to smithereens. This was a test project on how to irrigate a desert and turn a desert into a crop grow zone. Now you can see the large aquifer systems on the bottom left there. The different basins, the different aquifers, they run through Egypt, all the way over to Morocco, clear down to Chad, clear into Niger, all the way over there. It's the largest amount of aquifer water on the planet. And just to give you an indication on what Libya had been up to with its irrigation projects, I'm going to say a very solid 9,000 cubic kilometers of water. Not square, cubic. 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer times 9,000 full of water. And they were right next to the Mediterranean. So whenever they'd pull out of it, it would just keep refilling. And the further they were away from the Med, the sweeter the water got. So where it says low water quality, that was like the first filter coming with the salt out of the Mediterranean. And then the further you get down in, like Niger and Chad, they got amazing water down there. And they are sitting on hundreds of thousands of cubic kilometers of water. So what you want to do is figure out where the basins are, Libya all the way to Morocco, and you could go all the way through Northern Africa and the Sahel. Then you'll understand you need the above ground rainfall, and then you need the below water resources. Couple those together, and you got a new grow zone. Now, how are you going to pay for it? Is the thing. Cryptocurrency and a stable coin. I don't care if you're from Algeria or Mali. I don't care if you're from Ethiopia or Eritrea. A stable coin is payable across everywhere. It's spendable in any country you go to. The investment that'll be put in there will be billions and trillions, but it won't be traditional electricity like we think of. It'll be electric gravitics, pair and dev magnetic motors, and this type of infrastructure that does not require a grid to roll out. The new world we're moving into, the reason the grids aren't being repaired is they've already planned with this UFO release of technology. Inside that document, by the way, there's 2 million pages released. There's about a 50-page little segment in there that talks about electric gravitics and how to use the Earth's magnetic field to create power. It's not free power. The magnetic field's being generated from somewhere else. So when they say free power, yeah, you're kind of grinding a thin line there, splitting a hair. This is going to be powered cryptocurrency investments, cryptocurrency stablecoin payments using magnetic motors and different types of delivery devices. Now, they're going to still need to put pipes in there, but China's been in there and they're like, that's our darling. And they even constructed ports out of Kenya and East Africa. Why was that? See, the Chinese knew the changes. They had the Silk Road for the last 4,000 years. They've already known wherever. The Chinese have mapped out the changes better than anybody on the planet, because they had caravans going here, there, and everywhere. The Phoenicians were good. You know, when we could only get back to the Sumerians and Hittites, that's the world's we're going to right now.
Central banks can and will contribute to this process, but they need to set the right expectations about their contribution. For society as a whole, the task is nothing less than to reorder our economies and lifestyles toward renewable and cleaner energies. To green our economies means a vast reallocation of resources across sectors, time, and countries. The financial sector is key to a shift of resources away from polluting sectors of the economy and towards green investments, and to produce the resources today that will finance the indispensable investments for the future. Financial institutions and markets are critical in this reallocation and should move funds away from less desirable activities, lowering their valuations, and towards more desirable ones, thus lifting their valuations. As an example, we need to massively cut the carbon footprint of our transportation system. This implies the financing of new vehicles and infrastructure too. Financial institutions and markets are poised to help with this task, but we need them to do so in an orderly way so that the financial system remains resilient. Above all, we need to ensure that the supporting market infrastructure is in place. Central banks need to bring their technical contributions into this discussion and then create the incentives for investors to act. All this calls for collective action and coordination at the national and global level.
The effective functioning of our economy requires that people have faith and confidence not only in the dollar, but also in the payment networks, banks, and other payment service providers that allow money to flow on a daily basis. Our focus is on ensuring a safe and efficient payment system that provides broad benefits to American households and businesses while also embracing innovation. In the Fed's early days, the development of dedicated telegraph wires facilitated the transfer of funds between banks. In the 1980s, automated clearinghouse services made it possible for electronic bill payments to be an alternative to paper checks. In 2019, the Federal Reserve committed to building the FedNow service, which will enable banks to provide real-time or instant payments to their customers around the clock, 365 days a year, benefiting communities across America. Recently, the rise of distributed ledger technology, which offers a new approach to recording ownership of assets, has allowed for the creation of a range of new financial products and services, including cryptocurrencies. To date, cryptocurrencies have not served as a convenient way to make payments, given, among other factors, their swings in value. Nonetheless, coins tied to the value of the dollar or another currency, known as stablecoins, have emerged as a new way to make payments. These stablecoins aim to use new technologies in a way that has the potential to enhance payments efficiency, speed up settlement flows, and reduce end-user costs. But they may also carry potential risks to those users and to the broader financial system. For example, although the value of a stablecoin may be tied to the value of a dollar, these coins may not come with the same protections as traditional means of payment, such as physical currency or the deposits in your bank account. Therefore, as stablecoins' use increases, so must our attention to the appropriate regulatory and oversight framework. This includes paying attention to private sector payments innovators who are currently not within the traditional regulatory arrangements applied to banks, investment firms, and other financial intermediaries. Technological advances also offer new possibilities to central banks, including the Fed. In particular, technology now enables the development and issuance of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. A CBDC is a new type of central bank liability issued in digital form. While various structures and technologies might be used, a CBDC could be designed for use by the general public. For the past several years, the Federal Reserve has been exploring the potential benefits and risks of CBDCs from a variety of angles, including through technological research and experimentation. Our key focus is on whether and how a CBDC could improve on an already safe, effective, dynamic, and efficient U.S. domestic payments system.
Today, I'm proud to say that under the UK's presidency, the group of the world's 7 most advanced economies, the G7, is launching a set of public policy principles for retail central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Central bank digital currencies could be a digital version of money, a bit like a digital banknote that could be used alongside physical notes and coins. Unlike most of the digital money people use daily today, it would be issued directly by a central bank, like the Bank of England in the UK. And governments and central banks across the world are working together, looking into what having a digital currency might mean in practice.
You know my views on CBDCs, and you know that I have pushed that project. Fabio Panetta is working hard on that together with members in the entire Eurosystem, with a high-level task force that is working really hard on moving forward. But in a way, I'm really pleased that attention is now focused on the role that crypto
always speak of crypto assets and not cryptocurrencies, and not by chance, because as Kristalina just said, they are not a reliable currency, they are not a reliable mean of payment. In order to be a currency, somebody must be responsible for the value. Nobody is responsible for the value of cryptos. And it must be accepted universally as a means of exchange. It's not. The more interesting story is probably CBDC. And here, I say it for Axel and for all the industry, we also have to build a partnership. I know there are some worries from banks saying, look, we play a role, not from Credit Suisse, for sure.
Thank you, thank you.
Which I'm glad.
We're not going to.
He's a good guy.
It's a whole other panel.
Saying, look, we issue commercial bank currency, which is true. All of us have credit cards with bank currency, and we are more or less very active in the payment system. It doesn't mean that in the future, commercial banks should disappear from that. But we have to build a partnership in order to give to citizens and to give also to corporates and financial institutions still access to central bank currency with the best technology. We cannot have the technology on one side, cryptos, and trust on the other side, old-style central bank currency. Let us keep it together.
Yeah. Central banks can also change entirely the structure of how money and monetary policy works and fiscal policy, because they can give it to different people in different ways. So they can credit the restaurateur, but then penalize with negative interest rates the baby boomer saver because they want to release their money back into the economy. They can give students a positive interest rates to help them save. They can change everything. This is the rise of behavioral economics and incentive systems. So governments essentially using big data can find who they need to stimulate at any time and adjust accordingly. They can do it dynamically. This is a structural, massive shift to everything we understand about economics, particularly macroeconomics. Nobody's prepared for this. None of us know what this means. It means, and it will be sold on, a load of good things. And I think there's a lot of good things that come from this. I think it is an elegant solution to some of our problems. But elegant solutions in governments and central banks lead to unintended consequences. The issue is here is to have this new system, you're going to give up your freedom. You are going to have every transaction you've ever done and ever will do recorded. There is no cash. There is no way of tipping the gardener unless it goes by cash. It means that they can tax you at every transaction level. Now that's great. We could get rid of the IRS and all of the tax collection agencies because it could be done directly. That's good. But again, you've lost your freedom to transact in anonymity that cash gives you. Most of us really don't have that freedom. I mean, let's face it, behavioral economics, we've seen the rise of Facebook and Google, and they manipulate us all day and all night for their own economic ends or for the ends of their advertisers. And governments, well, they do the same. They've used and adopted behavioral economics and will do more and more so. And we don't really have a lot of anonymity from them. So there is a big pro and a big con to this, but it's coming and it's going to change everything.
In Finland is warming faster than the rest of the world. In communist Canada is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world, report says. Down in Australia is heating up faster than the rest of the world. Israel is warming up almost twice as fast as the rest of the world, data shows. In China's heating up twice as fast as the rest of the world. Oh, it's the worst though at the South Pole. South Pole warming 3 times faster than the rest of the Earth, says study.
Imagine a traditional city and consolidating its footprint, designing to protect and enhance nature. The line will be home to 9 million residents and will be built with a footprint of just 34 square kilometers. And we are designing it to provide a healthier, more sustainable quality of life.
Digital ID wallets, or whatever name they call it. In Italy, it's the green passport. We have new names, and they keep morphing them to help them market it. If it snaps into place with an all-digital financial system, including CBDCs, they will convert our home, our car, and our communities into digital concentration camps. And I don't use that term lightly. At that moment, there will be no hope of building anything. We will have entered into a slavery system in which a handful of the most powerful people in the world can strip you and I of our assets, of our children, and control literally every aspect of our life, where we go, what we read, what we say, and what we eat. And of course, as you know, they're planning insects and synthetic food. We have 1, maybe 2 years to stop it. If we don't, most of what we're discussing here today will be moot. So we need to be designing local currencies, but not for our digital concentration camps. We need to make sure that doesn't happen.
These are grasshopper kebabs. Heartily encourage that you try one.
Okay.
I did it already.
That's my motto.
So these are actual ants.
These are black ants from China.
Insects are becoming a trend. The Western diet has to kind of shift and change. And most importantly, it's natural, it's normal, and it's the way that we have to feed the future.
I am here to reveal my hidden talent, eating micro livestock, cornworms. They're still alive. Extraordinary. Very moist, chewy. Can't quite describe the flavor, but let's try this. 2 billion people in the world eat bugs, and I'm one of them. Here we have, crickets. Oh, nothing. Like a hairy nut. For dessert, the fried grasshopper. These are amazing. Grasshoppers. I recommend them. Thank you for spending so much time with me.
This looks like I could make cocoa with this. What is that?
Well, that's an insect-based premium protein. It's made from molitor, which is mealworm larvae. The company is called Insect. This is infras. This is for fertilizer. And as you have there, this is a powder derived from the mealworm, and it's a insect protein just been approved by the EU for human consumption.
You're not just getting me to eat dirt, are you?
No, man, I wouldn't play you, bro. We're like one entity now.
If this is protein, it's essentially tasteless. It's just a protein supplement?
Exactly.
I could put this in a smoothie or something?
I'm telling you, yep, and they'll be making all kinds of stuff out of it. And by the way, it is the making of it is severely reducing the amount of emissions it takes. It is a innovation just in we're doing something incorrectly. If we make this switch, it's a huge intervention.